So you just got done watching 28 Years Later, the long-awaited sequel to 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later, and you want to discuss the latest film? Well, you come to the right place. 23 years. That's how long it's been since Danny Boyle and Alice Garland unleashed a terrifying rage virus upon the world in 28 Days Later. Now a new chapter unfolds, picking up the threads of a world forever scarred. In this breakdown, I'll be diving into the new chapter, discussing the plot, characters' death, the new lore, and share my thoughts on an unexpected, bonkers, deeper meaning of the ending, and discussing what's next in the series. But first, share your thoughts and opinions and your interpretations on the film and what you think about it overall and what do you hope to see next. With all that being said, time to turn off that episode of Teletubbies and let's take a bow and arrow into this film and discuss 28 Years Later. Spoilers ahead. So quick disclaimer before we get into the discussion, this breakdown will be based on only one viewing experience I've had with the film so far, so please don't hesitate to share any details that you found important or something that I might have missed in the comments below. Now before we discuss what exactly happened with Isla, Spike, and Jimmy at the end of this film, let's start at the beginning and discuss what happened before and recap the film's story. The film opens by taking us back into the nightmarish beginnings of the outbreak. We're introduced to a young boy named Jimmy. He's told by his mother to stay inside with what is listed as Jimmy's sisters and cousins, left to watching the popular British children's television series Teletubbies, who I initially thought were the inspiration to the cult that we meet much later in the film, but we'll discuss that a little bit later. Not much longer after his mother's instructions, Jimmy and the others are confronted with the horror that no child should ever face, as the infected have arrived and entered the room, killing the children as Jimmy watches but manages to escape, but not before witnessing the death of his mother as well. This horrifying scene serves as a chilling reminder of the virus's brutal and indiscriminate nature. It's also important to note that Jimmy watching the Teletubbies right before his life will be changed forever, and this being the start of him losing his innocence. But also making the connection to what happens within Spike's story, but this being much more accelerated. We watch as Jimmy seeks refuge in his father's church, as Jimmy's father doesn't seem to be afraid, but instead he's accepting to this being the end of times, as he believes this is Judgment Day and he welcomes death. Now before the father is changed, we see he gifts his Jimmy a crucifix necklace, a potent symbol of hope and protection, before succumbing to the overwhelming tide of the infected. As Jimmy watches and hides in the floors, we're witnessing these chains of events that would forever change Jimmy and shape him into the man we meet at the end of this film. Now, of course, this franchise is known for its great opening sequences, and this one's no different. It establishes some of the film's main core themes: broken families, acceptance, sacrifice, and experiencing death at a young age, and enduring struggle for survival in the face of unimaginable horror. Fast forward 28 years later. The rage virus has been neutralized on the European mainland. Great Britain, deemed too dangerous, remains under infinite quarantine by NATO. Amidst the desolate landscape, pockets of humanity cling to existence. One such community has established itself on a small isolated island, a sanctuary secured by a heavily guarded tidal causeway, their lifeline to what remains of the world. Within this isolated community, we see that the people have responsibilities and their roles are upheld. From the looks of it, this established community has regressed to going back to the medieval times with how they dress and look, and also they have no modern technology or doctors present.
Like, they don't have doctors, medicine, can only eat what they can grow. They can go hunt, but they have to go hunt on the mainland.
But we can only get here in low tide.
And they have rules. If you leave the island and if you don't return, there's no one going out to look for you. They're going to assume that you've been infected and you're dead and you're gone.
It's here we are introduced to our main characters. We have Jamie, who's the father of the family, a hardened scavenger. We have his wife, Isla, who's bedridden and ill, and their 12-year-old son, Spike, who's our main entry point into this world and story. Their lives, though seemingly stable, are haunted by unspoken fears. Isla in particular suffers from a mysterious ailment, memory loss, unsettling confusion, and frequent nosebleeds, which the cause remains unknown for now, a consistent source of anxiety for Spike throughout this film. Now, after Jamie and Isla get into a disagreement about Jamie taking Spike to the mainland for his first hunt, it's here that we see the differences in their parenting. Jamie wants Spike to be the protector just as he is, and what seems to be this natural progression in the community, which is to have their 14 14 to 15-year-olds learn how to fend for themselves and their families. Whereas Isla wants to keep Spike safe from this world, and it's here we see the nature versus nurture come into play. It's interesting to look at Isla, who has memory loss, and she's living in both the present and the past. There's the past, in which there was a pre-virus, but then there's also the present, in which she lives in which she fears what's come of the world, and she doesn't want her son to succumb to its waves and living in fear. Now, as part of Spike's coming-of-age initiation, he embarks on a journey to the mainland with his father, a rite of passage to prove his mettle against the lingering threat of the infected. Spike knew it was just a matter of time before this day would come, as we see that he's been practicing his bow and arrow and his knife handling in preparation. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it appears that every teenager at some point has to carry their own weight and bring something to the table within this community, and it appears that the boys must go through this hunt ritual since the infected plague started nearly 30 years ago. It's here that we get to see this very deliberate editing cuts to watching Jamie and Spike leaving, cut this with the scenes from 1944 Technicolor epic film adaptation of William Shakespeare's play of Henry V. With the film being made near the end of World War II, it was intended as a morale booster for Britain, and you can make the correlation between the idea of going off to war with Jamie having Spike leaving his home and teaching him at a young age to be a soldier in this war against the infected. The footage showing the young soldiers preparing for battle and them then going into battle and losing their youth and innocence, as does Spike as the film goes along. There's also a shot early on in the film before Spike leaves with his dad where he reaches out for his toy as if he wanted to bring it with him, but he doesn't, and to me this is similar to what we saw with Jimmy at the start of this movie. Two kids having to leave their childhood behind forever. Now, this father and son hunt starts off pretty well as Spike and Jamie come across the slow and overweight infected known as the Slow Low, as Spike manages to take it out by shooting it in the neck with his arrow as his father takes out the rest. But it's in this moment that they take notice of an infected who's a child, and Spike wants his father to spare its life, and we see Jamie does. This to me shows us that Spike doesn't want to kill out of pleasure, but only out of necessity, which is commendable but not responsible in this world that they live in. You can look at his compassion as being naive, or as being a human and wanting to preserve the living experience even for the infected who aren't technically dead. Now, to backtrack on the slow, low, bloated infected, while they're not as threatening as the others, I viewed them as a consistent reminder of death. Now, while slow, they're still a threat. They creep in the shadows and eat away at the worms, but their presence is a simple reminder that death, while it can take its time to come to you, it's inevitable and comes in all shapes and sizes. Now, instead of heading home, they explore a bit more. Jamie shows Spike the beauty of the mainland for the very first time. It was established throughout this film that a kid like Spike, who was born in this community, is unaware of the things like having a cell phone or even a frisbee, while the rest of the world proceeds as normal. Now, as they continue their hunt, we notice writings painted on a house bearing a familiar man's name. Behold Jimmy, he's coming in the clouds, which is foreshadowing for Jimmy's cult and their presence on the mainland. As they come across an abandoned house, Jamie tells Spike that you never know what useful things you might find. This to me immediately made me think about one of my favorite video games of all time, which is The Last of Us, where Danny Boyle said that they took a lot of inspiration from in creating this film. Now inside, Jamie and Spike encounter an infected who's hung up by his ankles and has the name Jimmy carved into its flesh. Jamie wants to teach Spike another lesson and wants his son to kill it and says to him that it's got no mind and it's got no soul. Now, Spike hesitates, leading to the infected breaking loose, but Spike eventually kills it. Again, this hesitation shows that Spike isn't quite fully on board with killing, and it doesn't come natural to him, not quite yet. Now, their journey takes a dark turn when they encounter an Alpha, a terrifying evolution of the infected, far larger and more frightening than any other infected that we've ever seen before in this franchise. They not only possessed increased strength and lightning-fast speed, but they're also very smart. It's in this moment that we see the fear in Jamie's eyes as the Alpha communicates with his pack to attack them. They were far more infected than their arrows could take out, even by someone as seasoned as Jamie, as they run for their lives. As they run as fast as they can, Spike is afraid of what's going on as he misses every single shot to slow down and even kill the infected that is chasing them. This would turn out to be a very important moment for Spike and comes full circle later on in this movie, as they stumble upon another abandoned building and they manage to kill the infected chasing them as they seek refuge in the attic as the Alpha patiently awaits from afar. As the night falls, Spike apologizes for missing his awaited celebration back home, but more importantly, for freezing up when they were being attacked. Now, Jamie surprisingly doesn't shame his son, but instead he encourages him by telling him that he did better than most put in his position at his age. It was in this moment to me that even despite breaking the community rules and having Spike hunting at his young age of 12, Jamie does care for his son in his own way. He just wants him to be safe and be able to survive in this world. Now, as the night goes on, Spike takes notice of a distant bonfire and questions his father about his origins, but Jamie insists that there's nothing to worry about. Now, before we move on, I do want to talk more about these alphas. The world of 28 Days Later has moved forward, and with it, the rage virus has evolved. Being such a big fan of this franchise, I couldn't help but to be so fascinated by this new and terrifying additions to the infected landscape. Now, these alphas aren't your run-of-the-mill infected as we see throughout this film. There's something far more dangerous, as Jamie described them as them being infected on steroids, and that's a pretty accurate description. Alphas represent a significant mutation of the rage virus. As I mentioned earlier, they exhibit enhanced physical capabilities, boosted increased strength, speed, and endurance. They're also notably larger and more muscular than the regular infected, capable of withstanding injuries that would normally incapacitate others. Also, alphas themselves don't wear any clothes or pants, and I'll imagine there will be a lot of memes and conversations about the male nudity in this film. What's even more chilling is that alphas retain a degree of intelligence. They aren't just mindless killing machines, they possess a disturbing level of awareness as presented by their cruel habit of collecting the heads of their victims. This suggests a more complex neurological impact on the virus in these specific mutations. These alphas showcase the horrifying potential of the rage virus and its capacity to evolve over time. Now, my working theory about the mutation of these alphas stemmed from Alice and Andy from 28 Weeks Later, as it was revealed in that film that they were immune from the rage virus. Could their DNA have played a role in the mutation that we see within the alphas? Something I hope that is explored further in the following sequels. Now, back into the main story, we watch as Jamie and Spike are forced to escape the attic after a herd of animals cause the building to collapse, as they attempt to make their way back home before the Alpha takes notice. Now, as they arrive closer and closer to their island, proud father Jamie doesn't take notice that the Alpha is running straight towards them with pure rage. This scene right here was incredible for so many reasons. Number one, the cinematography of these northern lights was so beautiful to watch, but in contrast, you have this terrifying Alpha in a full-on sprint towards our main characters, and to me, this is the definition of an edge-of-your-seat experience. As we watch Jamie and Spike yelling and screaming to the gates to get open, we see the Watchers manage to kill the Alpha after numerous arrows to the body, but it wasn't until they used this flaming metal spike to be the fatal blow. I truly believe that Danny Boyle and his team really managed to heighten the intensity with these alphas. For me, not only the editing, but the use of the style in which Danny shoots action sequences is incredible, especially when you consider the use of the various different cameras and, shockingly, the different iPhones and lenses they use to capture these intense scenes. To me, this brought me back to 1999's The Matrix, when the Wazowskis and their team created these new rigs and cameras to capture the bullet time and to shoot their action sequences, and this film feels similar in a way where you see and you feel the violence and the visceral nature, and it really puts you as an audience into the shoes of our characters. This is the type of experimental filmmaking that I love, and it really enhanced the experience. Now, after their near-death experience, we watch as the community celebrates Spike for his first hunt, as Jamie makes his son out to be this natural killer with no fear, but we know this isn't true. As the night celebrations continue, Spike's illusion of his father is broken, as he witnesses Jamie having an affair with one of the local women. The next morning, we see Spike confronting his father about what he saw, and he brings up his mother's condition as he questions if his father is seeking other women in preparation of his mother's possible death. This is where Jamie reveals the story behind the bonfire Spike saw and tells him the story about Dr. Ian Kelson, a recluse flu survivor whom the villagers fear. Jamie recalls the story of a time he saw what Kelson was doing. He witnessed him lining up hundreds of dead bodies and burning them in what appeared to be some ritualistic fashion, and he did it in such a way that made him out to be some psychopath in Jamie's eyes and put fear in those who saw him, and it created this urban legend about him, but we later find out his reasonings behind this. Now, this story doesn't stop Spike from believing that his father is keeping the doctor from helping his mother, as this encounter ignites a plan that Spike has to help his mom. As Spike decides to take matters into his own hands, we watch him set off a fire within the community and secretly ventures into the mainland, taking his mother with him in hopes of finding her a cure. This act of defiance sets them on this collision course with the unknown dangers that lurk beyond the island's protective barriers. Now, on face value, this was a dumb idea based on the fact that we just witnessed how Spike wasn't able to truly fend for himself without the help of his father, but you understand why he's doing this. Despite his shortcomings on the hunt, Spike isn't willing to accept death, especially accepting the idea of losing his mother. Now, later that night, as they're out on their own beyond the barriers, while taking watch, we see Spike falls asleep and is almost bitten by one of the slow-lows infected, but the screen cuts to black. Now, we head to the next morning and we see that Spike isn't bit, and to his and his mother's surprise, they see an infected dead with a bag wrapped around its head. Now, moments later, we cut to a flashback of that event in which we see Isla waking up and protecting her son, and she was the one who killed the infected, showing that no matter her declining condition, she's always willing to protect her son. As they make their way towards the doctor, they share some lasting memories as Isla experiences a moment of confusion and she starts to call Spike her father. As she shares a childhood story that stuck with her about her father telling her about the history of this field that they're at and how it's everlasting. Unfortunately, this moment is interrupted by the infected as Isla and Spike now are being chased. We watch as fate intervenes in the form of Eric, a Swedish NATO soldier whose patrol boat sinked off the coast. It is in the desperate struggle for survival that Eric crosses paths with our main characters, rescuing them from the clutches of the infected at this Shell, or should I say Hell, gas station. Now, this is the moment that we get a little bit of levity in the film as Eric shows Spike a picture of his girlfriend and Spike shares his thoughts on her artificial looks. Now, Eric's presence also offers insight to our characters as well as us as an audience. It gives them and us a look into the rest of the world, which turns out to have internet, cell phones, and Botox. As it appears that the rest of the 28 years later world has been able to carry on as the rest of the world, just without the UK's involvement in any global events. Now, as Eric joins the group, their journey leads them to a horrifying discovery. Isla hears some noises coming from a train, and as she looks on the train, she discovers a pregnant infected woman giving birth to an uninfected newborn. Now, Eric, hardened by his experiences, prepares to kill the child, seeing it only as a future threat. However, before Eric can act, we are introduced to a new alpha by the name of Samson as he tears him apart and continuing the chase. To me, this scene represents the savagery of men and how the savagery and the infected are equally dangerous. Now, we have to discuss one of the biggest additions to 28 Years Later's lore, and that being the discovery that an infected woman can give birth to a baby who does not have the rage virus. We know the alpha known as Samson is the father, but the question is, would he have eaten or maybe turned his own daughter into one of the infected? This just adds more and more complexity and depth to these alphas and their packs. Now, earlier in the film, we had this really brief scene showing the infected just basically living their lives. We have them cleaning their bodies, they're engaging in conversation essentially, and they've basically created their own community. I am so fascinated in learning more about this in the coming films because this suggests that these newly mutated infected are slowly developing and becoming more and more like humans. Also, I can't fail to mention that later in the film, the doctor suggests that the placenta was able to protect the baby while in the utero, assuring that it wasn't infected by the rage virus. Which, speaking of the doctor, while being chased by Samson the Alpha and at their lowest point, fate would have it again that they are rescued by the doctor who uses a tranquilizer dart to subdue the alpha. Now, Kelson fills them in on how he was able to put the alpha to sleep and how he's been able to make it on the mainland so long as he's made this cocktail of medicines to subdue the infected but also created this repellent to keep them away from him from all these years. Now, I do question why the doctor never attempted to kill the alpha after we saw what he did to Samson here and what he does later in the film. I'm only to imagine that maybe the doctor is going to experiment on the alpha, maybe in the sequel. Now, Kelson leads them to his refuge, which is this sanctuary constructed of these bones from both the infected and the uninfected corpses. This bizarre tempo speaks volumes about Kelson's methods and his understanding of the virus.
A man who is compassionate. I think he's someone who's accepted the fact of death.
Do you know the words memento mori?
It means remember death.
How does he live day to day? How has he survived 28 years alone? I was very impressed by the depth of detail about what he is. You might think he's a creepy guy, but he's a complicated figure.
Now, the doctor tells them about his beliefs in death as he mentions memento mori, which is Latin for remember that you have to die. This is an artistic symbol or trope acting as a reminder of the inevitability of death. The concept has its roots in the philosophers of classical antiquity and Christianity and appeared in funerary art and architecture from the medieval period onwards. This being his thoughts on the inevitability of death and serving as an encouragement for the reflection on more meaningful life and the appreciation of time that you have left. Now, as the night falls and after examining Isla, the doctor discovers a devastating diagnosis, which is terminal cancer that has spread to her breast and her brain, and there is no cure. Now, in arguably the most heartbreaking moment of this film, we see Isla and Spike bid each other their farewell. Now, the doctor, with a sense of grim compassion, he shoots Isla with a morphine dart at her request, offering her release from her suffering. Following Isla's death, the doctor gives her skull to Spike, who chooses to climb to the top of the temple and lay the skull at the top of the summit. Now, following his mother's death, Spike returns the favor by saving the doctor from the newly reawakened Alpha Samson by putting him to sleep again. I do wonder if we'll see Samson make an appearance in the sequels on his hunt for finding his daughter. Now, Spike makes the critical decision to leave the newborn behind at the gate of his village with a note for his father. So basically, the note tells Jamie about their journey, what happened to his mother. Also, there's information about this newborn child who isn't affected, but also has given the name of the child to name it after his mother. And he tells his father that he's going to go on his own journey. He's going to come back when he feels like it. Realizing what Spike has done, Jamie desperately tries to go after his son, but is unable to due to the high tide. Now, this is where we get our full circle moment, making his back in the film, as Spike is at a campfire and he is confidently killing these infected, which shows he's no longer the scared child that he once was. Now, as more infected arrive and caught between danger, Spike is rescued by a cult of survivors, a group led by a man named Jimmy, the same Jimmy from the opening scene, now grown and wearing that crucifix necklace from his father. You notice that his crucifix is turned upside down. To me, that represents the idea that Jimmy, maybe a believer in God and religion, has now changed his religion or maybe has thrown away religion. He's created his own cult and his own beliefs. Now, initially, going back to what I said at the beginning, it seemed like their color schemes were similar to the Teletubbies, but again, there's a much more in-depth explanation on why they're dressed the way they are. Now, the fun doesn't stop there, as Jimmy congratulates Spike on his success in holding off the infected. Jimmy offers his services to kill off the rest. As we watch the Jimmy cult kill the infected in a very bizarre and violent ritual, and we even see them suffocating and hanging one of the infected like they did with the one that Jamie and Spike found earlier in the film. Now, I would imagine that this bizarre way of killing the infected is Jimmy growing up in the world as a kid, thinking that this was some badass cool way to kill the infected, like something you would watch on television. As our final moments show Jimmy offering Spike a place in their group, and Spike accepts. Now, as bizarre and wild of an ending that was, there is a more sinister and darker meaning behind Jimmy and his cult. Now, after doing some research, it appears that Jack O'Connell's Jimmy Crystal and his crew and their outfits consisting of vibrant purple tracksuits, heavy gold jewelry, and Jimmy's long blonde hair were all inspired by Jimmy Savile, the once adored British television presenter who, after death, was accused of committing hundreds of instances of sexual abuse, many involving children. It's been documented that Jimmy took advantage of the access that he had to medical facilities because of his charitable work to prey on the patients. It's also been said by an undisclosed doctor that Jimmy had an interest in the dead. Honestly, this being my first time hearing of him, so I had no full understanding of the hold he had on the British culture prior to his death. In the 1960s, Jimmy was best known for hosting the music show Top of the Pops. That was followed by the BBC program Jim Will Fix It, in which he would grant children's wishes, and that show ran from the 1970s into the 1990s. Now, taking all that information and applying it to this film, making the connection considering what this means to the world of 28 years later. If the rage virus broke out in 2002 when 28 Days Later was released, then the events of The Infected happened almost 10 years before the once British star would have had widespread knowledge of Jimmy's crimes. Now, going back to this film, the young Jimmy Crystal that we meet at the beginning of this film, being that it takes place in 2002, Jimmy would have known of Savile as a strange but treasured and beloved entertainer. Now, going back to the real world, even when Savile died at the age of 84 in 2011, his reputation was in such good standing that people from all over the country traveled to attend his funeral. Now, after doing this research, and trust me, there's still so much to explore with Jimmy Savile and also the connections to this film, I couldn't help but to have this somewhat bad taste in my mouth. But then I found this interview that provided some more insight from the creators Danny Boyle and Alex Garland themselves.
Just need to ask you about Jack O'Connell.
Aye.
I mean, what a way to end the film. I really think he's going to get people talking with these sort of very interesting look that may hark back to an infamous individual that may or may not be named. Can you talk about the thought process behind that character and ahead of the sequel, The Bone Temple?
The whole film, and if we ever get to make it, the whole trilogy, is in some ways about looking back and looking forwards, and the relationship between looking forwards to better worlds or attempting to make better worlds, or trying to construct the world that you're in on the basis of old worlds, I suppose. So the sort of contrast or conflict between the two. And the thing about looking back is how selective memory is, and that it cherry picks, and it has amnesia, and crucially it also misremembers. And we are living in a time right now which is absolutely dominated by a misremembered past, and so it's that.
And he's as much to do with pop culture as he is to do with sportswear, to do with cricket, to do with the honours system.
Exactly.
It's all,
that's exactly right.
It's all kind of twisting in this partial remembrance, clinging onto things and then recreating them as an image for followers.
He's a kaleidoscope, isn't he? In a funny way, sort of trippy, fucked up kaleidoscope.
That's one hell of a way to end an interview.
Now, after hearing that, I am very intrigued to see what Alex Garland has to say in regards to people looking up to the mentors and their mentors not being the people they thought they were. How many times in our own personal lives have we been the person, or we know someone that has beloved a celebrity or an athlete or a singer as a child, as a teenager, or hell, even as an adult, and we inspire to be that person? We look up to them, we take inspiration from them, and then we later find out, either later in their life or after they die, that they were actually a terrible person. So I would imagine that in the sequel to this film, that Jimmy Crystal, played by Jack O'Connell, who is said to be the lead of the next film, he's going to learn about what his inspiration did, and maybe he'll change for the better or worse. We'll just have to see. So let me know in the comments below, how do you all feel about the film taking real life person Jimmy Savile and implementing it into this story and being an inspiration to Jimmy Crystal? Is it in bad taste? Are you open to interpretation to see how it plays out? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. Now, as we come to a close, putting the Jimmy Savile aside for a second, 28 years later in this ending is deliberately ambiguous, leaving us to ponder the future of Spike and the implications of his encounter with Jimmy's cult. Is Jimmy a savior, offering Spike a place within his new community built on hope and resilience? Or is he a harbinger of something far more sinister, a figure leading a group consumed by fanaticism or corruption by the very horrors they seek to escape? Which, speaking of what's going to happen next, let's talk about what's the next film going to be about. Now, both 28 years later and the sequel subtitled The Bone Temple were shot at the same time, and The Bone Temple will be directed by Nia DaCosta and is scheduled to release January 16th of 2026. Now, depending on what website you're looking at, it can be IMDb, Letterboxd, or even Wikipedia, the cast has a mixture of return of Jimmy, Spike, Jamie, Dr. Kelson, and members of Jimmy's cult, and we get the return of Cillian Murphy's Jim. Now, I would imagine that the film will focus on catching us up to what happened with Jimmy and what he's been doing for the last 28 years since we last saw him as a kid. And I would also imagine that it's going to explore how he started his own cult and abandoned his father's beliefs in God and religion. I would also imagine it will focus on Jamie searching for Spike and us learning more about the different mutations of the infected and encountering more alphas, including the vengeful Samson. Now, honestly, I'm a bit skeptical about Nia DaCosta taking the helm based on her previous films, which was The Marvels and Candyman, which I didn't hate, but I found it disappointing, but I also don't blame her entirely on the colossal failure, which was The Marvels. Now, I did enjoy her directorial debut in Little Woods, which came out in 2018, and I know she's extremely talented, and I would imagine that Alex Garland and Danny Boyle wouldn't just pick a name out of a hat to direct the next film, so there has to be something that she pitched, there has to be something that she offered to the story, because again, I find her to be talented, and I'm hopeful she'll make her best film to date, and if the final 5 minutes of 28 years later is any indication of what's next, we are in for one crazy, bizarre ride. Now, that's going to be the end of this 28 years discussion. I really appreciate you all making it to this point of the video, or if you're listening to this in podcast form, I would love to hear your thoughts about the film, the biggest takeaways, the deeper meanings, the standout moments, and how did you all interpret the ending? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. Now, if you all want to hear more of my thoughts about the film, more of an analytical as far as the direction, the performances, the cinematography, the score, click on the video that's on the screen now, or if you're listening to some podcast, I do have a movie review of this film available on my podcast feed. You all are so amazing. Don't forget to like this video or podcast, share it, subscribe, follow for more discussions like this. You all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.